Welcome to the CondoVultures.com podcast with your host, Peter Zalewski, a Miami real estate broker, Wall Street consultant, and expert witness. This podcast is focused on identifying real estate buying opportunities in the South Florida condo market of Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. The CondoVultures.com podcast is not authorized by the South Florida real estate industry and will most likely annoy many of the region's talking heads. This podcast will feature straight talk and salty language that could be offensive to some. Please remember that past investment success does not determine future gains, especially in South Florida's volatile condo market. For more information, please visit CondoVultures.com. Don't buy a South Florida condo, discounted or distressed, before taking a Condo Vultures correction tour. CondoVultures.com offers weekly bus and walking tours that focus on educating buyers on the how-tos of identifying discounted condos, analyzing the opportunities, and purchasing units. Every tour attendee receives a list of all condo projects in a particular market, a market assessment handout, and unmatched expert analysis. For more information on the condo correction tours, please visit condovultures.eventbrite.com.
This is Peter Zalewski of the Condo Vultures podcast. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. And I wanted to alert you that if you have a property that you're looking to sell in the Tri-County, South Florida area, I would encourage you to reach out to Jenny Cortez, a licensed real estate broker with cvrrealty.com. She's my partner. She's been in the business for north of 15 years. More importantly, she knows the market. She knows how to get a deal done. And she also realizes that it's more important to get a price that you can accept and sell the property rather than to hold firm on some price that's never going to be achieved and ultimately languish on the market. So if you're looking to do a deal that you want a skilled expert who can help you sell a property, reach out to Jenny Cortez at 305-865-5859, 305-865-5859, or visit her website, cvrrealty.com. Welcome to the Miami Reporters Roundtable podcast. I'm your host, Peter Zalewski from Condo Vultures. If you're tuning into this podcast, you're going to hear a conversation by current and former journalists talking about some of the biggest stories that have occurred within the last week. So there's a lot of hyperbole in the real estate market in South Florida, and we're basically trying to cut through that and give you, the audience, some sort of perspective. Who is our audience? We're a podcast for developers, for lenders, for investors, for buyers, for sellers, and even gadflies. So as you're going out to some of these holiday celebrations through the end of the year, who knows, maybe you pick up some tidbits you will be able to share and release to the world from our particular podcast. So we appreciate you tuning in. We encourage you to subscribe. We also encourage you to like. It'll help with our algorithm. It'll help for with us to basically move up through the charts. Now, how does the podcast work? Well, I handpick 6 articles. I send them off to the journalists, ask them to give them a read, and then basically they're going to give us their take on it. Before we go ahead and introduce the other members of the podcast, let me sort of lay out just some housekeeping issues. One, if you have any comments for us, you like what we're saying, you dislike what we're saying, you want to criticize, you want to compliment, go ahead and get us on X, which is formerly Twitter. You can get us at Miami RRP, which stands for Miami Reporters Roundtable Podcast. It is not AARP. That has to do with senior citizens and those people who are a little long in the tooth. We are a very vibrant young podcast. So remember, Miami RRP, which stands for Miami Reporters Roundtable Podcast. The other thing I want to throw out to you is if you like what we're doing, you want to be part of the community, well, there's a way to do so. We now are selling merch. Just like Marvel sells merch on all its superheroes, we view the journalists who come on our podcast as superheroes because they're able to kind of cut through all of the propaganda that's out there and help you, the audience, understand. So if you want to check out any of our merch, go to condovultures.com. You will see a merch category and simply click on it. That being said, let me go ahead and introduce the members of our podcast this particular week. We have a gentleman who was a journalist for over 25 years, wrote about banking, wrote about finance. He was an editor. Right now he's a public relations marketing firm in Miami. It's called Gruss Communications. It's led by John Gruss. If you want to get a hold of John, or if you want to follow him, get him on X, which is formerly Twitter. Get him at John Gruss, JeanGruss. And if you want to check out his website, go to GrussPR.com, GRUSSPR.com. What's going on, John? How are you?
Hey, what's up, Peter? I'm ready to cut through the hyperbole.
Who else do we have on the podcast this week? We have a gentleman who's a journalist for over 20 years who wrote about white-collar crime. He did business stories. He also did restaurant reviews. Right now, he's a consultant related to public relations and marketing. It's no one else but John Fakler. You want to get a hold of John on X or Twitter. If you want to follow him, go to JT Fakler, JTFAKLER. What's going on, Mr. Fakler?
Not much, Peter. Glad to be back on the Gadfly podcast.
It is a podcast for gadflies. Who else do we have on the podcast this week? We have a gentleman who's been a journalist for over 3 decades. Right now, he is a freelance writer. His work appears in publications such as The Real Deal, The Commercial Observer, as well as some magazines and other things. No one else but Mike Seemuth. Anybody wants to get a hold of Mike? Mike isn't necessarily an X user. He's not a Twitter user. So if anybody wants to reach out to him, they can actually get him email. And his email address is mikeseemuth@gmail.com. Mike Seemuth, which is SEEMUTH @gmail.com. What's going on, Mike? How are you?
Hey, just getting ready for Thanksgiving, Peter.
Mike,
Have a slow week here at the office.
Hey, slow weeks are good. Slow weeks are good. Well, I hope you have a fantastic Thanksgiving dinner. I hope everybody on the podcast has a fantastic Thanksgiving, as well as the audience. So, all that being said, let's go ahead and get into our story. We're going to start off with John Fakler. John Fakler with story number 1. Mr. Fakler, this is a story that is coming out of the South Florida Business Journal. I'm going to read you a headline. I'm going to read the first couple graphs, and I want you to comment. After you comment, then we will go ahead and open it up to the round. Headline: Citadel's Ken Griffin says Miami's financial scene could replace New York's Wall Street. Here's why. And then we got our first couple graphs. Citadel founder and CEO Ken Griffin touted Miami as the world's next financial markets hub that could replace New York City's Wall Street. The billionaire hedge funder told Bloomberg in a live interview on November 14th at the Citadel Securities Global Macro Conference in Miami that the city's vibrant business economy represents the future of America. And this is a quote from Mr. Griffin. He says, and he's talking about Miami, focused on civil society, the business community, and good governance. This state of Florida has done an incredible job of electing people into office that care about safe streets, good schools, and good jobs. The story goes on to say no state income tax and corporate incentives has driven more financial professionals and companies from areas such as New York City and Chicago to flock to the Tri-County area, now calling Wall Street South. Mr. Fakler, you've been here since the 1980s. I'm just wondering if you could give us some perspective. Has Mr. Griffin identified maybe something locals haven't? What say you, Mr. Fakler?
Yeah, well, he's got a dog in the hunt. I mean, this story was, and this interview was based out of Citadel's own event here in Miami. So, listen, we've heard the story before. We had the crypto bros brought in by Mayor Suarez. That went sideways. Many of those companies either just opened up satellite offices. They didn't move their headquarters. You had the main crypto bro fraudster, Sam Bankman-Fried, come swooping into town. Even got the naming rights for the arena, the AAA, to name it after FTX. Now he's going to jail. They've changed that, and they've since changed the branding of the stadium. But listen, we've heard this before. And we talked about this, Peter, as you know, in the last few podcasts. We talked about how that didn't work as far as the crypto bros, the blockchain industry moving here. It didn't really happen. And we had one of our reporters, Jeff Ostrowski, talk to me about back in the day. In fact, I covered this as well, that the biotechnology was supposed to move down here. It was supposed to be very exciting. Scripps was going to open a huge physical plant, and they never did. Jeff did a lot of reporting on it. I did back in the day. So again, there's another example of a industry outside of real estate and health that was supposed to take off in South Florida, and it never did. So that said, I mean, listen, Griffin's got a dog in a hunt. He's put millions of dollars in philanthropy in this area in Miami, for hospitals, for education. He's also invested $1 million in real estate deals in both commercial and residential in Miami and Palm Beach. So, he's definitely got a dog in the hunt. And who knows, I mean, it has to be exciting for reporters in this area to see that there may be a new industry. I don't know, hedge funds are mostly private, so it's going to be hard to get information. They're mostly privately held. But it's, I'm curious to see how that plays out, because they're not the only hedge fund that's moved down here. So it may play out in the future. Who knows?
Mr. Fakler, I want to let me just ask you one follow-up question until I sort of open it up to the audience. Ken Griffin is down here. He says he's going to make this major commitment. There's recently been news that Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, who has ties to South Florida, is just basically announced that he's leaving Seattle, where Amazon is based, a suburb of Seattle, and he's moving down to Miami. My question to you is, are these people coming here? And keep in mind, these people who are coming, not necessarily young hipsters, if you will. They're not the crypto bro types. Are they coming here because they want to set up industry? Or are they coming here because they want to sort of have a hybrid between working and sort of doing what a lot of older people do when they come to South Florida, which is, retiring. So what say you, Mr. Fakler?
This is a decades-old story when it comes to business and industries. And yeah, it's to save on the taxes. There's no state taxes. They're also certainly going to glad hand the politicians and vice versa. So they know they'll probably get some sort of corporate breaks as a result of making that move. They may have already been promised that before they even move. So yeah, I think it's more about saving themselves money. I don't think there's any great idea about coming down here and starting their industry or promoting their industry down here.
Interesting. And I guess the question I have for the rest of the roundtable is, if you look on social media, Ken Griffin's announcement that Miami will replace New York City as the next financial hub of the United States and possibly even the Americas. Yeah, do you guys find any truth to that? Is that a hyperbole? Could Miami actually turn into this? And does somebody like Ken Griffin, does he have the wherewithal to kind of make it happen? Or is he going to be like a developer who came from Argentina called Faina, who had a big splash? His name was everywhere, and lo and behold, he ended up exiting his position and packing his stuff and taking his white hat and heading back down to Argentina. So what say the rest of the roundtable, John, Mike?
Well, Ken Griffin and Citadel is much more than just a hedge fund. His firm is a market maker. So basically, they run the plumbing of Wall Street. So whenever he says anything, I think it's worth paying attention to. His name carries a tremendous amount of weight on Wall Street. This isn't a Faina, okay? This is not, we're talking, Ken Griffin is a legend on Wall Street, and his firm basically runs the plumbing of just about all stock trading. So, Citadel is just massive. And I don't think many people really appreciate the scale of his business and enterprise. He does have a hedge fund, but really the Citadel is a market maker, securities firm, and just a giant. So whenever someone of his stature says something like that, I think people do pay attention. And I think in recent years, the whole mindset has shifted away from financial centers like Chicago and New York. For a number of reasons. The pandemic certainly accelerated a lot of that, but obviously the shift of work from home and the shift of technology that has really enabled everybody to basically work from anywhere where there's internet access. Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, all those guys, all those industrialists came down here. They never built auto plants down here because, there wasn't the population or anything, but they didn't have the internet. So, I think that adds a new dimension. That being said, this is a story, as old as Florida. And people do get very excited about, pronouncements like Miami replacing New York City as, financial center of the world. I don't think that's going to happen, but, certainly we can get our fair share.
Mike Seemuth, let me ask you a question if I can. During the Great Recession, there was somebody who bet against the housing market and became a billionaire effectively overnight. His name is Jeff Green. Jeff Green, he ran for high political office in the state of Florida, never succeeded, basically sold his condo, which he had in South Beach, and he headed up to West Palm Beach. He bought a bunch of dirt. He bought a bunch of real estate. Never to be heard from again. So I'm just wondering, we get these Wall Street types who come down here, they make their commitment. And by the way, Mr. Griffin from Citadel, he was one of the buyers of a condo over at the Faina in Miami Beach. Many of the people who bought condos in this Miami Beach condo called Faina, where prices were north of $3,000 a foot, many of them basically lost their ass as it pertained to the real estate. So they knew what they were doing in their industry. They didn't necessarily know the real estate side. Mr. Seemuth, do you see any similarities between maybe Jeff Green, the billionaire who made his money on Wall Street, came down here during the Great Recession, was able to basically gobble up most of downtown West Palm Beach? Or do you think Mr. Griffin's in a completely different spectrum, if you will, because everything John was mentioning in terms of his reach and working the plumbing of Wall Street?
I agree with a lot of what John said. And yeah, I do think he's in a different league. Um, Jeff Green also maintains a very low profile. I don't think he has disappeared, but um, he's around. I've had the pleasure of talking to Mr. Green a few times, and he's hard to get a hold of. So uh, I also think that you mentioned Jeff Bezos. I mean, he's just coming home. He graduated from Coral Gables High School. So, I mean, maybe it's a second home for him. I'm not really sure. But I do agree with Mr. Fakler in the sense that South Florida always seems to be in search of self-validation. And when somebody like Bezos or Griffin or Lionel Messi comes to town, oh my God, it's just, there's so much excitement. And the idea that we get all the Twitter about this suggests to me that we are not going to replace Wall Street anytime soon. But it is a long tradition here. I mean, somebody famous coming to town, and everybody just feels more validated a little bit. I don't. There's a lack of confidence here that because people who lived here for a long time know that it's not just wealthy people in high-rise condos whiling away their days on the beach with margaritas. There's a lot of poverty, a lot of grinding going on here just to get from day to day with a lot of the population. So it's and the lack of affordable housing is a symptom of that. So I guess I took you from the top to the bottom there.
And that's why we have all of you. Great discussion, gentlemen. Great discussion. We're going to go on to story number 2. Sean Gruss, we're going to go to you with story number 2. This piece is coming out of the Miami Herald. And for the record, I'm quoted in the story. That's not why I picked the story. I'm not going to comment on the story. You guys can sort of kick it around if you want. But, I picked the story because it just came out. There's been a tremendous reaction to it. It has to do with a lot of things that are going on in South Florida right now. One is the insurance crisis. Another thing has to do with the lack of housing, affordability, a variety of different things. So this is, I think, an issue that's going to really sort of pop up in 2024. So I'll read the first couple graphs and then John, and then I'll ask you to go ahead and comment. Here we go. Again, Miami Herald headline: Are condo buyouts rising in Miami? What owners should know as developers make moves. And here's the first couple graphs. Developers are hungry for prime real estate and are approaching condo owners of aging buildings, many on the waterfront, to persuade them to sell. It's a tough decision for owners and maybe even the start of a standoff. Miami Herald spoke with 3 real estate pros to share advice for owners contemplating condo buyouts or terminations, with at least 80% of residents in a building agree to sell to a developer. Story goes on to talk about some of the issues that are playing out, talking about how you can actually do what's called a termination or a buyout, where a developer will come in, buy out all the units. Once all the units are purchased, notify the state. The state will then basically terminate or cancel the condominium. The folio numbers will all revert back to 1, and then a developer is able to take the property, knock it down, and build something brand new on it. So effectively recycle rather than have to lay down new infrastructure, roads, sewers, things like that. So John, why don't you take the story, and then if anybody else wants to chime in, please feel free to do so. And I'm going to be mum because I'm quoted in it. And let it rip. I have a thick skin. You want to rip me a new one, please do so.
Well, I think if you're in an older condo building, I mean, you've got to assume that it's a target for a buyout. I mean, especially with the rising cost of insurance, the new legislation that just passed requiring condos to set up reserves and conduct engineering surveys and rehab older buildings, which a lot of them have had deferred maintenance, and special assessments are coming. Big special assessments are coming. A lot of people can't afford those. So, I mean, certainly if you're in an older condo building, 20, 30, 40 years old, I mean, you can pretty much assume that developers have eyeballed it at least. I mean, I hear this anecdotally from friends who own a condo. I have a friend who owns a condo in one of the low-rise buildings that's been around for 30, 40 years on Brickell Bay Drive right here in Miami. And, developers are snapping up units, sort of on the sly. They're not announcing their intentions because they don't want to be, they don't want to overpay. And so they're lowballing some offers, and they're acquiring condos here and there, and pretty much until they get a certain amount of condos in the building, and then they sort of launch an assault and for the rest of the units. So I mean, there's definitely some activity going on. Some of it is like sort of a little bit underhanded and behind the scenes. And then, of course, the condo associations are run by people who also stand to benefit. So, we've been talking about HOAs that are being mismanaged. And I think some of the HOA boards are, would be happy to be compensated for assisting developers and decertifying a condo building and perhaps getting rewarded. So I think there's some of that going on. So there's if you own a condo in any of these older buildings, I would definitely be be on alert. And who knows, in this market, you might actually make out pretty well. This isn't the Great Recession where everybody was losing their shirts and condo vultures were buying for buying units for $125 a square foot. So now you could probably expect a better price, but you need to watch it and hold out for top dollar.
Mr. Fakler, Mr. Seemuth, any opinion about condo buyouts? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it actually a necessity due to all the added costs that owners in older buildings, which tend to be antiquated? And generally speaking, when I look at a building, just to say what it's antiquated, typically it has a surface parking lot. If you see cars parked around a building, that means it's older. It hasn't been maximized, because a lot of the newer buildings, the real estate is simply too expensive. So therefore you build a pedestal, you have a parking garage, and the units go on top. So, is this a necessity for maybe some of these older buildings as a result of the disaster that occurred in Surfside, where nearly 100 people died and $1 billion was paid out? The federal government is studying what caused that, and it actually put a lot of insurance companies at the brink because of the payouts that were necessary.
I'd say get the hell out while you can if you're in one of these older buildings. That's all I can say.
Mr. Fakler, you lived in an older building. You were up in
yeah.
West Broward County. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamics of living in one of these buildings? How big was the building, and what was it like with your neighbors? And was everybody cordial? And if they need to spend extra money, put money in reserves in order to meet the new state laws, would they have done that openly and willingly? And would they have had a smile on their face?
Well, the high rise that I lived in was actually east in Broward and Pompano Beach, and that was actually before any of this happened. So I really can't comment on the current situation of HOAs and high rises. So I never really, that was going back in the 90s. So
what about when you lived in Western Broward County, Davie?
Yeah, Davie. That's right. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, the one in Davie was a 55 and over at the time, and there were a lot of issues. This was post the hurricane, post Andrew, but we had a lot of problems with flooding from other storms. And, in fact, after I sold mine, I actually made a good profit on mine. But the poor guy who bought my place, the roof was the top floor, and the roof caved in from a storm. Oh. And the blue tarp was up there for years. So I don't know what the hell happened with the poor guy. But, I walked out with 100% profit on it,
And Mr. Fakler, you obviously disclosed everything on the way out, right?
Well, I mean, listen, I didn't know what did I know? I didn't know that the roof was, going to cave in on the guy. I mean, it was, from a storm. Actually, it was probably for one of the hurricanes that happened at that point. And I think this was around 2005, 2004. I think we had a series of bad hurricanes. So that poor guy bought at the wrong time, obviously. And I guess everything is about timing.
Mike, would you like to add anything?
Just that a lot of I understand Jean's point that some of this is kind of going on behind the scenes, and there's probably some funky deals being worked out with HOAs in the process. But I do believe I agree that if you can get out, it's a good idea because some of these older properties, and I don't think everybody's getting screwed in the process. For example, I forget the name of it, but it's just west of Biscayne on 19th Street, 19th and Bayshore.
Yep.
And that's being redeveloped, and the developer is paying, I believe, $1.9 million per unit. And when I lived there, 20 some years ago, nothing in the building was selling for anywhere close to that. Now things have changed a lot since then too, but I think it's a gift from heaven for a lot of people.
Wow, there we go. We got some good news. Everybody says that I'm negative. That's some good news. Gift from heaven. A gift from heaven. Love it, love it, love it. Let's go on with story number 3. Mike Seemuth, we're going to go to you with story number 3. This piece that you actually wrote. I'm going to read you the headline, first couple graphs, and I want you to provide some insight. You might not be able to comment because you wrote the story, but you can definitely give us some insight, and then we'll kick it around. So let me go ahead and read the headline and the first couple graphs. Again, coming out of The Real Deal. Headline, too hot to handle. Miami-Dade puts employer mandate protecting construction workers from heat on hold. And subhead, county commissioners voted Tuesday to defer action until March on proposed rules to protect outdoor workers at farms and construction sites from hot weather hazards. And first couple graphs from Mr. Seemuth, and then maybe you can provide some insight. Miami-Dade County commissioners delayed a final vote on a proposed hot weather standard for employers in construction and agriculture aimed at protecting outdoor workers from heat-related illness. County commissioners on Tuesday deferred a vote on the standard until their second regular meeting in March, amid concerns that the county standard would be vulnerable to litigation or possible preemption by state law. The date on the commission's second meeting in March hasn't been set. According to county website, the vote to defer came near the end of Miami-Dade's hottest year on record, according to research by the Rosenstiel School at the University of Miami, which was cited in the proposed ordinance to create a new hot weather protections for outdoor workers. And here is a quote, and this quote is coming from Anthony Rodriguez, Vice Chairman of Miami-Dade County Commission. He says, I cannot get behind it in its current form. This is a topic that should be regulated by the state, not at the local level. Mr. Seemuth, if you're a county commissioner and you have constituents who basically have to go out there and swing a hammer, and they're already starting at 7 a.m. Most construction workers start at 7 a.m. They finish at 3, so they can beat the heat. And county commissioners don't want to get behind that. I'm just sort of wondering, can you walk us through this? Everybody knows it was a very, very, very hot summer. What is the rationale on both sides? I can understand it on the side of the people who were out there swinging a hammer in the heat. What about on the other side? It doesn't really seem to make sense to me, other than maybe it's a wage issue. What say you, Mr. Seemuth?
To me, it's considered a business issue.
Okay.
Some of the commissioners made some who voted to defer county commission meeting last. Most of them were talking about trying this out as a pilot program, with county employees or with county contractors. There was some concern that it only targeted 2 industries, agriculture and construction. But I don't think the preemption thing is interesting because there were some commissioners who said they were in direct contact with state legislators who were working on some kind of heat standard that would be statewide and would preempt a local standard. And OSHA, for its part, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is supposed to protect workers, the federal agency that protects workers, does not have a specific heat standard. What they have is a general duty clause to protect workers from hazards, including heat. And OSHA does enforce this, but I think there's a feeling that OSHA just can't cover it, and that it would be much better for workers. There was even a state standard, So in a way, the people that are pushing this are pushing it because they feel like there's a vacuum in terms of regulations here. I'm sure the good farm owners and the good construction contractors are already doing this. What the kinds of things that they're asking for, to be specific, is, every 2 hours to have when the heat index, that is humidity and temperature combined, goes above 95. I don't ask you to explain how they come up with that. When it's damn hot outside,
Yes.
every 2 hours, you're supposed to get some shade and a drink of water. And there's also a due diligence requirements that you're supposed to post notices in English and Spanish and Creole, telling workers of their rights. And there was some concern by some of the more conservative members of the commission that this was going to be just way too big of an interference in the lives of farm owners and construction contractors, which, my personal opinion is hogwash. I think the times call for a new approach. I mean, even if you didn't know, the University of Miami researchers telling you that this is the hottest summer on record, I think people who lived here for a while kind of thought it was.
Hell yeah, absolutely.
Anyway,
this summer.
So preemption could be an issue if they do decide to pass an ordinance in March. But I doubt litigation is, and here's why. The Associated Builders and Contractors, which is primary trade group representing the construction industry across the country, has local chapters everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And the local chapter down here several years ago sued the county after Miami-Dade County approved a set of regulations for tower cranes after we had a couple tower crane accidents.
Yes.
And the Associated Builders and Contractors, ABC for short, sued and won because OSHA had a specific standard for tower crane operations.
Yeah.
They do not have a specific standard for heat. So I'm not sure the litigation threat is really that big. So anyway, that's kind of my take on it.
I think from a cynic's standpoint, I mean, do farm workers and construction workers vote? And do they contribute to political campaigns? They don't have a lot of political capital.
I'm right there with you.
So let me take the conversation in a different direction. Mr. Fakler, you were a longshoreman. You were a union guy. You were a longshoreman up in New York. You came down to Miami. We all know what happened with the auto workers in the United States up in Detroit, where basically the auto workers were able to get a huge raise. We know what's going on with Starbucks, where they're unionizing these Starbucks. We have heard about what's going on at other stores in and around. Mr. Fakler, somebody who was previously in a union, I'm just wondering, could you envision a day where this momentum, because of the UAW, United Auto Workers Union, as well as Starbucks, as well as Amazon potentially, where you might actually see some pushback based on the momentum that came out of Detroit this summer/fall?
Well, I just say fight the good fight. Just wanted to correct you. I was a longshoreman in Miami, actually. It wasn't.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a contracted job, so I had no benefits whatsoever. If I was to fall off the ladder, it would have been all over for me. I wasn't a union in New York. I was I worked for the New York Public Library System, which was unionized. And the only thing I remember about that union, they didn't do anything for you except for take more money out of my pocket. I mean, I had federal tax, I had state tax, city taxes, and then I had the union dues. By the time, it wasn't a high-paying job. And by the time I was done, I could barely make my rent payments. So for me, it didn't do anything. I just like the concept, though, that to take it to the next level, we see that the Writers Guild and the Actors Guild succeeded in a large contract out in California. And I really think that we're starting to see some sort of wind carrying some of these unions forward. And it'll be really interesting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, but look at what happened to the schools just recently, Miami-Dade schools. I mean, they're about to get decertified because the percentage of union dues-paying members has fallen short of the new threshold that's required. So It's just happened this past week. I mean, it was in the
Oh, wow.
news. So, it's really interesting to see, in a state like Florida, a right to work state like Florida,
Yeah.
it's really tough to unionize anybody here.
Never going to happen in Florida. You're right about that.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thanks for clarifying, Mr. Fakler. Thanks, gentlemen, for the conversation. Let's go on with story number 4. John Gruss, we're going to go to you with story number 4. This piece coming out of the South Florida Business Journal. I'll read you the headline for a couple graphs and I want you to comment. Headline: South Florida bank profit margins, loans rise despite higher cost of funding. Here's why. First couple graphs for Mr. Gruss, then I want you to comment. South Florida banks are lending more and seeing an increase in profits as higher rates boost returns on interest-earning assets. The local trend is unique from banks elsewhere in the country that are beginning to feel the squeeze on profits from higher funding costs and slower loan growth. While the median cost of funds for the 20 Miami-Dade County-based banks increased in the last quarter by 0.24 percentage points and 0.17 percentage points for the 30 banks based throughout Broward, Palm Beach, and Martin counties. Loan yields rose by 0.12 percentage points in Miami-Dade and 0.09 percentage points among the Gold Coast banks, which led to a slight increase in the collective net interest margin for both regions, according to Holiday Group's latest Florida Bank Peer Performance Report. Mr. Gruss, you used to write about banking. You have some banking clients or people in the financial services industry with your firm, Gruss Communications. Why don't you sort of help us and help the audience understand what's exactly going on here? And is it all a result of higher interest rates? Therefore, banks are simply making more money, especially for those deposits they have that are paying out any interest rates or low paying CDs?
Yeah, I mean, look, part of the problem with these stories is that they're looking at like a backward looking data from quite a while
Yes.
ago, and it really doesn't tell us what's actually happening today. And what's more, these kinds of stories don't really delve into the different kinds of loans that are happening. So we don't know if these are residential loans, car loans. What kind of loans are these? What I'd be really curious about is construction development loans, which are sort of the bread and butter of community banking in Florida. That's really where the rubber meets the road here. And I think if you actually looked at that data, it would show considerable weakness. The fact of the matter is that community banks are under a whole lot of pressure because they've been paying so little on deposits now. And you can actually go and get a money market fund with 5% or better. And so why would you leave it in the bank, which you're paying a fraction? So they're going to have to start paying up. So that's going to really squeeze their profits. And the fact of the matter is too, that the community bank and regional banks, particularly the ones that operate in the Southeast and in Florida, I mean, their bread and butter is commercial real estate. I mean, that really is where they have an advantage over the big banks, the JP Morgan Chases, the Wells Fargos and Citigroups. I mean, it's in the commercial real estate lending to small and medium sized businesses. And we all know what's happening with commercial real estate. It's going through a softening, and I think we're going to have some issues. And I think the regulators are really coming down hard on the smaller banks, the community banks, the regional banks. They're essentially telling them to stop lending on commercial real estate. That slack is actually getting picked up though by private equity and private credit firms that are stepping into that role. But of course, they're charging a lot more for the money. So it's going to be interesting to see. These kinds of backward looking stories that are sort of broad and general and take sort of aggregate data, it's really hard to tell what really is going on. But I really keep an eye on commercial real estate lending, construction development lending. I have a sense, I just haven't seen that many deals in the paper. And for example, in South Florida Business Journal, I mean, you could read about a deal every week, a year or two ago. And now those deals are sort of few and far between now. And I don't see a whole lot of regional community banks making big loans on new development construction projects in South Florida. I think everybody's pulled back. There's quite a bit of apartment development. There's concern that there's like some overbuilding in that sector. Of course, the office market is, it's gotten its share of bad PR. And retail is looking a little soft also. So I think you're going to see some pullback by the banks. Yeah.
Interesting, John. Interesting. Before we go on to Mike Seemuth for story number 5, I made a presentation last week to an organization of general contractors, subcontractors, anybody in and around the construction business. And in talking to them, I had an opportunity after my presentation to talk to a banker, a senior vice president. And my question was, are you guys putting money on the street? And his response was, no, we're keeping our powder dry. And what that means is they're basically sitting back, trying to see exactly how to play out. And they want to be able to move when and if things become a little bit clear. So, Mike Seemuth, we're going to go to you with story number 5. This story you wrote, it appeared in the Commercial Observer. I'm going to read you the headline first, couple graphs, and I want you to provide some insight. You wrote the story, you might not be able to comment, but let's see what you learned when you were reporting it out. Again, Commercial Observer headline: spiking premiums lead some Florida owners to forego flood coverage. Subhead: despite Hurricane Ian's recent warning, some property owners are choosing to skip coverage due to the cost. Here we go. First couple graphs. Mike, how expensive has property insurance premiums gotten in South Florida? So high that some property owners forego coverage. When Hurricane Ian made landfall in Southwest Florida as a Category 5 storm in September of last year, coastal storm surge in swollen rivers, canals, and bays flooded towns from Sarasota south to Naples, and especially Lee County, which leads all of Florida counties in the number of property insurance claims that stem from Ian. The story goes on to say, policyholders in Lee County, including such hard-hit places as Cape Coral, Captiva Island, Fort Myers Beach, Pine Island, and Sanibel Island, have accounted for 1/3 of the 700,000 plus property insurance claims in Florida arising from Ian. According to the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation, in Florida, property insurance covers windstorm risk, while flood insurance is sold as a separate policy. But coastal and inland flooding may have caused as much property damage as Ian's destructive winds. Up to half of these flood damages are uninsured, according to the estimates from CoreLogic, an Irvine, California-based real estate data provider. Mike, wow, people are taking a risk of riding out a storm. Hopefully they've left if they're being notified by the government to get up and leave because their life is much more important than any kind of damage. But by rolling the dice and trying to survive and not getting this insurance coverage, they're putting their fortunes at risk. How, why, and is there anything in the process to try to eliminate this risk?
Well, to me, one of the more interesting risks that I uncovered in reporting this is that if you have a luxury home, let's say, $1 million and more value, the standard FEMA program is problematic because it provides coverage up to $500,000, and there's a 50% rule, which says that if whatever repair you're claiming is going to increase your property by 50% more in value than it was prior to the storm, you can't do it. So this forces a lot of higher end homeowners into the excess coverage market, I think is a term that's used to cover, but it's extremely expensive. I had a guy, a lawyer in Naples, tell me that he represents people that have high-end properties that were looking at paying, $100,000 to $200,000 for excess flood coverage on top of what you can get from FEMA. So, when you're looking at those kind of numbers, you're a little more motivated to take a risk. I also interviewed, from the commercial side, I interviewed the lady who runs the Naples Soap Company, which has a number of retail stores. 4 of them were flooded out and had to be completely rebuilt. But she told me, it cost $60,000 to rebuild a store, and she says it was going to be costing $30,000 to protect. I don't know if it's probably more than one property, but a lot of people have made this calculation and decided to take the risk. This one guy I talked to who has rental homes on both coasts, about 11 of them altogether, never buys flood insurance. he said he would. He doesn't buy wind either. He said he would if he had mortgages on the properties, which is normally a requirement if there's a lender involved. But if you're a cash buyer, you can pay your money and take your chances. It's a tough situation.
Mike and the Roundtable, let me throw it out to you. I've been in Miami since 1993, so 30 years or so. And I can remember back to the 04-05 period when a number of storms just ravaged the state of Florida. You had Gene, you had Wilma, you had Katrina, you had all these storms that basically came rolling through and just created a lot of drama, created a lot of issues back then. And what I remember, though, most importantly, is we had a real estate run going. 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005. And it seemed like when Wilma came, which was late in the hurricane season of, I want to say 2005, basically insurance went on lockdown. And after that, it never really came back. And that is what I would argue led to basically a flattening of the market before ultimately a free fall of the market. Can you guys see anything similar to in terms of insurance costs, the availability of insurance impacting somehow this current hot real estate market where there's no supply and prices are sky high? Any similarities, or is this a completely different situation?
Because the National Flood Insurance Program, which is a national program, government program, reevaluated its whole methodology for pricing and evaluating flood zones. And what happened before was that Floridians were able to get cheap flood insurance, which basically the federal government subsidized cheap flood insurance for everybody. And people got used to it. It was like $500 a year. I remember this was 20 years ago. You'd pay $500 a year and you had flood insurance, and basically the federal government subsidized, everybody here. Well, if you live in Oklahoma or Nebraska or, places like that, you get kind of ticked off that you're subsidizing Floridians' lifestyle in the sun, So the whole flood insurance program got reevaluated, and now the rates are more like reality now. So Floridians are shocked, because they're getting these premiums that are sky high. And guess what? That's the real cost of insurance. It's not being subsidized by the federal government anymore. And so that I think Floridians had it good for a long time, and now we got to pay our fair share into the program. And these storms that keep rolling through, we're not, people aren't gonna from outside of Florida aren't gonna keep bailing us out.
Gentlemen, is there any possibility that the high price of insurance and the availability of insurance could somehow stall what's a very hot real estate market? Or do you think the private sector and the market will simply take over, regardless of the cost, just to keep the real estate circus going in the state of Florida? Because it is one of the most critical industries in the state.
I've wondered about that myself. I would imagine if you're a newly arrived New Yorker, you might have quite a shock, a sticker shock.
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating conversation. John Fakler, we're going to go to you with story number 6. This is a piece that came out of The Real Deal. Mr. Fakler, I'm going to read you the headline for a couple of graphs, and I want you to comment. And before we get into it, let me just sort of provide some context. There's been a number of city commissioners, as well as the mayor in the city of Miami, who have come under great scrutiny in recent months, basically because of allegations of a variety of different alleged crimes and or unethical types of moves. One of the gentlemen who was actually involved or has been named previously, he got arrested. He got arrested for a variety of different charges, felony counts. So that's the backdrop of this story, Mr. Fakler. I'm going to read you a headline for a couple of graphs, and I want you to comment again. Coming out of The Real Deal. Headline: sold. Alex Diaz de la Portilla loses family home at foreclosure auction. Subhead: plaintiff Wells Fargo paid $300,000 for suspended Miami City Commissioner's Shenandoah house. Shenandoah is a neighborhood of Miami, which, by the way, Mr. Fakler, you live in that neighborhood of Miami, right in and around Little Havana. So let me read the first couple graphs for Mr. Fakler, then I want you to comment. Next week, Alex Diaz de la Portilla gets another shot to reclaim his Miami City Commission seat in a runoff against auto parts dealer Miguel Angel Gabella. But the embattled political ran out of chances to keep the Diaz de la Portilla family home in Miami's Shenandoah neighborhood. Now, this story came out last week. As a result, the election's already occurred. during the election. Basically, there were a number of candidates running. It came down to two finalists who were going to run and basically a runoff. Gabella, who's one of the people named in the article, as well as Diaz de la Portilla. Those two are running for it. So here we go, Mr. Fakler. Next graph of the story. On Wednesday morning, the 5-bedroom house where Diaz de la Portilla and his two brothers grew up was sold for $300,100 at Miami-Dade County foreclosure auction. Wells Fargo, which in 2019 won a $628,545 final foreclosure judgment against Diaz de la Portilla and his ex-wife, Claudia Devon, acquired the property. The sale caps a foreclosure saga that began more than a decade ago when Wells Fargo sued Diaz de la Portilla and Devon for allegedly not making mortgage payments since 2012. Court records show in 1974, Diaz de la Portilla's parents, who still reside in the home, purchased a residence for $54,000. Records show they sold it to their son for $92,000 in 2001. Story goes on to say Diaz de la Portilla intends on buying it back. In quotes, he said in the text message, and another quote, it's a typical real estate transaction like any other. Diaz de la Portilla said the attorneys are negotiating it. Mr. Fakler, what do you make of this situation where we have this Miami City Commissioner is arrested for a number of different felony charges, and lo and behold, he has his family home foreclosed, sold at auction, but he says he's going to be able to circle back and buy it back. So what say you, Mr. Fakler?
Shocking. It's just shocking. I mean, look, they say, what's the saying? I said, there's only two things that are guaranteed in life. One is death and taxes. Those are the two. In Miami, I would argue it's death and political corruption. Why? It's owned. People, the voters in Miami just love to own this stuff. Now, if anybody would try to get away with this stuff in New York or some other big city, they'd be laughed out of office. In this case, I believe DeSantis suspended him from the commission. So he's got his distance from this, as far as I know.
Ron DeSantis,
the governor of Florida, right. So, he's trying to distance himself from this, but, it's just, it's just ironic that it doesn't bother Miamians when there's political corruption. It's like, okay, it doesn't matter. We're going to vote for him for whatever reason. It doesn't hurt candidates down here. So, this is, I wasn't shocked by reading about this because, like you said, there's other, officials who've been, bribery, other kinds of, white collar crimes. And it's just so typical. I mean, it's a constant down in Miami. So you don't even think you see that much in Broward or Palm Beach, but in Miami, you certainly do.
Mr. Fakler, before I open up to the roundtable, you live in Shenandoah.
Yeah.
You're basically a neighbor of this particular property of Diaz de la Portilla. Can you just describe for the audience what Shenandoah is like?
It's actually a very nice suburban area of the city. It's, small, but finely kept homes, well landscaped. It's very close to everything, close to Little Havana, close to downtown Miami, Coconut Grove, the Gables. I mean, you're right in the middle of it all. And so it's a real quick jump if you want to enjoy yourself and go out to dinner or to a club. So it's a great little area. It really is. I think I've always thought that the prices were extremely high as far as the homes go. I mean, these prices of homes here, are very similar to what you get in New York City or Long Island, which is very high priced real estate and a much bigger lot. Here you get very small lots, you get manicured homes, but it's a very desirable area.
John Gruss or Mike Seemuth, a desirable location close to downtown Miami, close to Brickell Avenue, close to Coral Gables, close to that community called Coconut Grove. Prices are going up. Why would you let a home go into foreclosure in that particular location, especially if it's maybe smaller? It was built quite some time. Maybe it's a tear down. Would you try to sell it to a developer? Would you try to sell it to somebody else, especially when there's no supply?
Man, I got only speculation on
Yeah, I mean, look, it's very speculative, but I will say that these kinds of news reports really serve to sort of raise a red flag about anyone who might want to buy a home or invest in real estate in Miami. That basically, this is a political machine, and if you want to invest or build or do any kind of developments, that you got to go through the political channels. And I think it holds the city back. It basically tells outsiders, if you're not a player, if you're not an inside baseball guy, and you don't sort of pay homage to the local politicians, that basically you're going to get scammed. And so basically, this tells outsiders that this is the kind of place where if you don't play by sort of the political rules of the city, that basically you're not welcome. And I think it holds the city back. And the sooner we can get past this kind of stuff, the better it's going to be for the city.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for participating in our podcast. So thank you, Jean Gruss, for participating. Jean was a journalist for over 25 years. Right now, he has a public relations and marketing firm called Gruss Communications. You should check out his website, GrussPR.com, GRUSSPR.com. You should also follow him on X, which is formerly Twitter. Get him at Jean Gruss, JeanGruss. I want to thank John Fakler, who we found out today. He was a longshoreman down in Miami. He also was a journalist for over 20 years, who wrote about white-collar crime. He did business stories. He also did restaurant reviews. Talk about a juxtaposition, a longshoreman doing restaurant reviews. And right now he's a consultant. You want to follow John Fakler on X or Twitter, you can get him at JT Fakler, JTFAKLER. And I want to thank Mike Seemuth. Mike Seemuth's been a journalist for over 3 decades. Right now, his work appears in publications such as The Real Deal, Commercial Observer, as well as a number of other publications. And Mike doesn't really participate in X or Twitter, so you can get him old school. Go email, which is mikeseemuth@gmail.com. Mike Seemuth, EEMUTH @gmail.com. And I'm Peter Zalewski of Condo Vultures. Do you have any comments for us? Do you have any criticisms? You want to compliment? Get us on X, which is formerly Twitter. Get us at Miami RRP, which stands for Miami Reporters Roundtable Podcast. And let me remind you, if you want to check out any of our merch, go to condovultures.com, look for the merch tab. We got mugs, we got t-shirts, we got shower curtains. You can get any and all of that. Go to condovultures.com, look for the merch category. And let me remind you, please, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe. Please like our podcast. And until next time, happy Thanksgiving to everyone in the United States. And even if you're overseas and you're following it, maybe it's a neat tradition you should look to adopt. So until next time, take care of yourself and we'll catch up soon. Ciao, ciao.
It's a simple formula and it works. Buy low, sell high. We're Condo Vultures. And when it comes to your real estate, we help you buy low. At Condo Vultures, we represent the buyer. And now's the time to buy. Log on to condovultures.com for more information. condovultures.com. And remember, before you sell high, you have to buy low. Featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, 60 Minutes, and Time Magazine. Condo Vultures Realty, a licensed Florida real estate brokerage capitalizing on the condo correction since 2006.
This is Peter Zalewski of the Condo Vultures podcast. Before I started doing these podcasts, I've been in the business of being a licensed real estate broker, a contributing columnist for the Miami Herald, as well as the Miami Real Deal, but also extra witness work in consulting. So if you are looking for an expert witness, or if you're looking for consulting services, a straight talk perspective as to what's going on in a particular marketplace, a building, or what happened previously, for whatever your situation is, whether you are an attorney, whether you are a institutional fund looking to invest, or whether you're a lender who's trying to come up with some sort of strategy and approach for your lending committee going forward, I just might be able to help you. To get a hold of me, please reach out to Peter at condovultures.com. That's Peter at condovultures.com. Or give me a call to the office at 305-865-5859, 305-865-5859.